Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining our interactive webinar, our panel discussion. This morning, we're going to be talking about this incredibly pertinent question of, is architecture still relevant in an engineering world? So before we do that, I'll set the scene for the session. We are hoping that this is going to be very interactive. We've got a fantastic panel who are going to be talking about their insights and their perspective and their experiences. We'll be running a number of polls the course of the session, and we'll also be using the Q&A feature on Zoom in order to take questions from participants and not from members of the audience. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to introduce some of your questions as we go through the discussion. So before we get into that, some introductions. My name is David O'Hara. I look after the business design and enterprise architecture consulting practice here at Konvergent. Konvergent, for anyone who doesn't know, is a boutique business design and enterprise architecture consulting company, also with a strong focus on technology and solution architecture. So we've set up this discussion this morning because we're seeing an awful lot of challenge, an awful lot of focus and some tension around this whole area of the relationship between architects traditionally practiced and this massive move towards engineering and DevOps. And we've seen tremendous investment over the last few years in engineering teams and in DevOps functions, and the creation of teams that are highly autonomous and making a lot of technology decisions in this very decentralized and autonomous way. So we're now looking at whether or not this is actually placed architecture function under some kind of tension or under some kind of threat. So that's going to be the focus of our conversation today. So I'll introduce the panel, and then we'll set up the first poll and the first couple of questions. So we've got a fantastic panel with us this morning, as I said, who are bringing with them a tremendous array of experience and insight. So firstly, we have got Tricia Dean. Tricia, if you'd like to say hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tricia Dean. Some of you that know me call me Trish. I have been an enterprise architect for longer than I care to remember. But currently, I am a principal architect at IG Index Limited. We are a financial services organisation, global, and we provide a financial trading platform which is in-house built. So our engineering function is very large, and our architecture function small, and also our global technology function is larger than our business function. So I have been experiencing great engineering contact and debate. So I look forward to sharing that with you all today.
Fantastic. Welcome, Tricia. And we're also joined by Adeline Go.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adeline Go. I have 22 years experience in both architecture and engineering. I've been working in consulting and also financial services industry for a long time. So the architecture and engineering topic is very close to my heart. Most recently, I've been the chief architect in Asia, covering several countries in Asia. So people in my team that I've hired range from architects, platform engineers, and DevOps specialists. So I'm very pleased to be joining this webinar today and to share my views on this very interesting question. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome, Adeline. We've also got with us Stephen Jones. Stephen.
Thanks, David. Stephen Jones. I think I have a foot in both camps. I come from the engineering software world, critical systems. I wrote scheduling systems for satellites and that kind of very deep technical world. These days, I spend my time doing more architecture, enterprise architecture, and as CTO, I say, a foot in both camps. So I can I know where the engineers are coming from, and I think I understand what the architects are trying to do. So hopefully I can bring a bit of both to the discussion.
Fantastic, balanced perspective there. Thank you and welcome, Stephen. And lastly, but not leastly, we've got Konvergent's very own technology guru, Rabi Arzuni. Rabi, do you want to say hi?
Hi, thanks, David. Great introduction. Thank you for that. My name is Rabi Arzuni. I'm the head of solution architecture at Konvergent. I'm also a techie by heart as well, and then previously an engineer, and been doing both implementation, technical architecture and then moved into solutioning architecture and enterprise architecture as well. So this is a great discussion. I have ties to both words, engineering and architecture. So I'm looking forward to the debate, and also I'll be sharing some examples where practical examples where we've helped some of our customers in this challenge as well.
Fantastic, thank you, Ravi. So as you can see, we've got a really, really good range of perspectives, spans architecture and engineering experience, and a fantastic range of industry experience there as well. So we're looking forward to a really, really good interactive discussion and lots of insights there. So before we get into the panel discussion itself, what we're going to do is we're going to pop up the first 4 quick polls that we're going to run. Now, this one, we're actually going to bookend the session. We'll run this quick poll now, and we're going to ask the same question again at the end of the discussion, just to see if people's thinking has evolved. And we will be publishing after the session some material that's going to basically synthesize some of the poll findings and a lot of the insights that the panel are going to be putting forward, as well as some other material that we'd like to publish, just basically to contribute to the discussion. So both that will be available post the webinar itself and a recording of edited highlights. So before we get into the questions, we're going to put up this first poll, and we're going to ask this fundamental question: is architecture still relevant in an engineering world? So somewhat binary. Interested to see where people's views are on that. As I said in the introduction, we've seen a massive move towards engineering, towards what you might consider to be emergent architecture, much more autonomy within products and particular domains, and therefore the risk of fragmentation or are people pulling in different directions. So are we still seeing a role for architecture there? Or are we seeing architecture basically being nullified by a shift towards a much more technology paradigm where product owners have a direct conduit into business? We'll give people a few more seconds to think about that, and we're going to revisit this at the other end of the conversation. So fantastic! Thanks everyone who's participating here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to tee up the first of a number of questions that we've received when we scheduled the webinar and asked people what was at the forefront of their mind. So I'm going to address this one first and foremost. I've just lost my notes. I'm going to address this one primarily. Actually, you know what? We're going to ask the whole panel this one, because I think it's a critical question. So the question is, how do you help to integrate architecture thinking into the engineering environment? How do you help to implement what might be a more federated EA operating model? You've got people taking architecturally significant decisions in those decentralized product teams. So I'll address this to Stephen first and foremost. Stephen, in your opinion, how will you help to integrate architecture thinking and EA practice into an engineering team?
I would say that we've had most success where we've achieved the integration by integrating with the people, as in moving people and creating integrated teams, rather than the kind of we'll have a weekly catch up, or we'll have a checkpoint, or we'll discuss, or we'll present and review. Actually having architects embedded in the engineering teams has been the way we've gone. I think it was a bit of a lesson learned. We started off a little bit more with separate teams and realized that we needed to bring them more closely together and have more product alignment. I mean, I do see, when I ask the engineers, what do they want from architecture? How can we help? There are still opportunities for us to help enable, for the architecture teams to help enable what's going on in engineering. Particularly, we've done a lot of work with trying to move at the pace that engineering moves at. Enterprise architecture can move a little bit more slowly. It takes a strategic view, making decisions with implications that are expected to run for months or years. Engineers are moving a lot faster and need a quicker response. So when you sit in that middle role, working with the engineering team embedded, but also with an ear to the strategy in the longer term, you've got to be able to move at those different match the pace of what's going on, I think, is what we found.
Match the pace, yeah. But good old bimodal challenge. A couple of interesting things that you said there. I think there's going to be a theme of collaboration coming in here, and also interesting that you said about asking the engineers what they want from architecture. So if I could address that same question to Ravi, your perspective then, integrating architecture thinking and architecture practice into the engineering world.
Yeah, so I've been an engineer myself. I tend to think both ways as well. I think engineers tend to be focused on actually executing the task that they've got in hand. Not all engineers just think on that task. I think a bit more strategic thinking would help in that case. Architects tend to think a little bit more strategic and a bit more more aligned, more closer to the business rather than the technology itself. When it comes to the federated team and setup, I think it's not the technical knowledge that about between the teams. I think it's much more of a cultural challenge. I think people tend to be a little bit more protective around what they do and their skills that they've got. So we need to break down those barriers. Need to be much more transparent and much more collaborative and open about actually discussing things rather than actually having those in silos. I mean, I'm working with a customer as we speak now, where they've gone in and adopted Agile fully, and they went into DevOps type of stuff. And what they found that engineers are doing the right things, what they've been told to do, absolutely, because that's their objectives. But then it created loads of silos, and it created some, spinning up services which are not needed or contributes to a vision or a strategy. So we're helping this customer to be able to run a reset now to put architecture in place because they thought they don't need it. So really be more collaborative, stop being protective on what you do, and just be honest and have a frank discussion between the two teams. I think easy said than done, I'm sure.
Easy said, simple but not easy, as one of our colleagues says. So an interesting thing there, it's not just about federation, it's about the risk of tribalism. So if I could ask Adeline your perspective on this challenge of imbuing architecture thinking into engineering.
Yeah, from my experience, I have observed that yes, the enterprise architects are much more closer to the strategic direction of the business. And often there's a huge roadmap plan out from an enterprise architecture point of view. Now, when it comes to execution with the engineering team, they tend to work in silos because it was easier to move faster. However, from my experience, the best model would be to find every single opportunity to put them together. Now, I have tried in the past, it's proven quite successful, which is to co-locate them as well. From the point of, typically, for example, enterprise architects sit in one corner and engineering and all the development teams sit together, and they code away. So I put them in the same room. And the other part of it is also to establish some really clear principles in both architecture and engineering principles, and make it very obvious to everyone what the principles are to deliver a good outcome together. And they will be different, and that's fine. But what I've learned is that the fact that with the awareness of what each other is doing and what each other's roles and responsibilities are, it became much more, I would say, there are much more synergy, and also people would be much more cohesive to understand why it's important to understand each other, and why architecture is equally important as much as engineering, both ways. Now, the other part of it is to measure the outcome of what the engineering delivery looks like at the end of the day. I often would put the enterprise architect, it's not always practiced that way, but I often ask the enterprise architect whether what they set up initially strategically, if that was to be measured again, did they see the outcome from what has been delivered by the engineering team? And that puts things into perspective over time. So that means that we start off initially with a good strategic direction, and then the end of it, you'll be able to see whether that was measurable in practice.
Okay, so there's a lot of interesting themes coming up here, not just collaboration, possibly something about culture, principles to enable people to make good decisions, consensus on a shared vision, a shared endpoint, things like that. Tricia, this seems like something that's very much a part of your lived experience right now. What's your take on this challenge?
So my take is it's about having architects, and I'm looking at some of the comments that we've got in the chat. It's very, very clear that we need to include all architects. in that engagement with engineering teams. And as Adeline says, it's about clear roles and responsibilities, but also both teams focused on the same outcome. So in my organisation, it's very early days, but we're moving towards product teams and embedding architects in a product team. So then there is that focus on one outcome, and it's that business outcome.
Okay, yeah, focus on the same business outcome, very much aligned with some of the things that Adeline was saying there about, you know, sort of shared vision and so forth. So from some of the themes that are coming up here, you know, there's themes about operating culture. There's themes about a common understanding of what it is that we're trying to build towards, the introduction of principles to help people make good decisions and so forth. A lot of this kind of implicitly speaks about architecture governance, maybe these tensions between intentional and emergent. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop up another here and ask people just to kind of take the temperature of this. So next question basically addresses this topic of governance. So how well would you say that architecture governance is adhered to within your architecture functions? Now, I think one of the other things that's coming out in terms of client work that we're doing and what we're seeing is that governance increasingly is a sort of perhaps a negative way of expressing things. I think there's potentially something that's a little bit more about collaboration and balancing these tensions of intentionality versus emergence and making good decisions in a collaborative way, rather than the traditional sort of, you know, top-down command and control. But are we seeing a pull away from traditional kind of ARB type forums? Is this a technical design authority taking more primacy, or are we simply seeing massively decentralized decision making? So we'll give people a couple more seconds to think about that, and then we will move on to the next discussion topic. Okay, a little bit more food for thought on that one. So what we're going to do now is introduce a couple more questions. It's interesting, some poll results coming up in real time. So picking up again with Tricia. Tricia, when you think about this need for marrying these sort of slightly oppositional timelines in which architecture is very deliberative, but agile, and engineering, of course, is a highly iterative and sort of near real-time decision-making process. How do you marry that need for iterative design work back into an architectural governance and design assurance framework?
So I can talk from my experience of what I've implemented at IG. So, you know, I've operated in other organizations with a real formal architecture governance process where, you know, we rock up with our architecture and it's critiqued for its grammar and its spelling. And it's all very unnecessary. There's no focus on the content of what we're trying to, you know, speak about or get approved. So from my experience of that, there's certainly no way I'm going to implement something very similar with a group of engineers who really have no idea what architecture governance is all about. So one of my first initiatives when joining IG was to set up some kind of forum, and it was really very lightweight, run weekly, and also to drive the right content for our engineers, because they are quite narrow focused in their thinking, was having some lightweight templates so we could get the right content out of them. But first and foremost, this became a supportive environment where people could come. We had technology leads, engineers, architects, and it wasn't part of any gate process, but to actually get the mission across to people within tech, it was about creating that process, the framework, terms of reference, what it actually is, and then go talk about it. So I was speaking with enterprise change, with technology leadership and engineering teams. So talking about what it is, and then, you know, making it all available for people to come and join the weekly forum. And that was 18 months ago. That's now turned into a formal gate process in our new demand process, because everyone has seen the value of it. And that actually has been driven by our engineering community coming and being able to, you know, present stuff, talk about stuff, and that's how we've done it at IG, and that's at the moment proving to be successful. I will also add that at the very start, we always were talking about it's an evolution, so if there's feedback on how we run this forum, then we will change it to meet the needs of the people that are attending rather than needs of architecture governance. Because at the end of the day, it's the same result.
Yeah, it's about helping people make good decisions and make the right decisions. So a couple of things that I'm hearing, there's something about making it less onerous, but also enabling it to evolve and mature as the working model evolves.
Yeah.
So, Ravi, it seems based on what you were saying about the client that you're working with currently, this seems to speak directly to some of the things that you've been dealing with in really literally at the moment or in the last couple of months. Is that something you want to offer some thoughts on?
Yeah, look, I'm a true believer that nobody goes to work to do a bad job. So whether it's engineers and architects, so certain autonomy and trust needs to happen there. And so really set the principles early and the intent of what you're trying to do. One of the frustration that we hear all the time from engineers, the architects, and certainly in multiple of engagement that I'm involved in now helping our customers, they just produce masses and masses of documentation, 40-page document at a high-level design, which probably most of it is a little bit irrelevant, and engineers just want to get things done, right? So, and I think governance, there's a lot of governance frameworks out there. I believe they're all for guidance. You need to use what's right for you, for your organization. But ultimately, the type of engagement that we're involved in is bridging that. So what I call just enough architecture. So you don't, when you go to a high level for a solution, for example, just make sure you've got the right information and the engineers knows what they're doing. They just need the pointers for that solution rather than pages and pages, which hinders governance, and it takes a long time to go through that. And also is how do you present that information to engineers so that it's understood? David mentioned that one of the customers is actually having the right presentation and visualizing that information from an architecture so engineers can understand it really quickly and say, oh, well, I understand what you're trying to do here. Let me just get this done. So yeah, so just, less documentation, more collaboration, and just give the information that is needed in that point in time.
Fantastic. Just enough architecture, less documentation, more collaboration. Those are words to live by. We have got a fantastic question that came in from the audience. So, put this out to the sort of panel in general. So the question is, if you embed architects into delivery teams, do you not just silo and fragment the architecture community and lose control of those strategic enabling initiatives? So are you helping or hindering by embedding architects out into the engineering teams? Ravi, you've got the floor. We start with you on that.
So yeah, I think ultimately it's about collaborating. Like you got to have openness and transparency on that, and just say that they complement each other. They do slightly different role, but coming together and putting themselves in each other's shoes, actually benefits that and makes sure it doesn't really hinder when it comes rolling out a particular product to the business or rolling out a particular capability. So I think it definitely doesn't hinder it. It probably makes it better and gets it done faster.
So let's see if anybody else in the panel's got a perspective there. So Stephen, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we architects are going to live in both worlds to a certain extent. You're there in the domain to support the delivery of the product and in working with the product team, but you're also an architect. So you do need to, you live in those two communities. It's just about one time or another where the emphasis is. And we have done things, for instance, so move people around. So I'll have a piece of work being done specifically in a product area for a specific domain addressed by an architect, but equally that same architect I can ask to do a piece of enterprise architecture, which opens then up across the board. It doesn't have to be a static, you're committed, you're dedicated, that's where you are for your tenure. No, I think there's more flexibility. And architects generally, I think, are pretty flexible, adaptable people willing to take on a challenge.
One other thing
Okay.
to add, David, it's good for architects to also understand where engineers are coming from and the capability. We tend to think, okay, you know, engineers needs to understand what architects are trying to do. It's actually a two-way conversation, you know, to make sure that that happens as well. So architects needs to be a little bit more flexible and open to critique and you know, from engineering community, and then trying to work together to go through these things. So not just because an architect designed something, then that's the gospel. You need to have an open mind about that.
Yeah. So a little bit about, I think you said walking a mile in one another's shoes. Very aware of what Stephen said about that need for adaptability, and I guess this to some extent this risk of not just fragmentation but sort of tribalism. Although tribalism isn't necessarily always a bad thing if it's about development of centers of excellence and so forth. But again, the big theme that's kind of coming out here seems to be work together, talk together. But how do we make sure that the right tooling and the right sort of ways of working and so forth are in place to put an appropriate level of structure around that? So I think, again, this is back to this kind of theme of different modes or different speeds or different forms of governance with greater or lesser degrees of formality about sort of collaboration. We've got another poll here that I think sort of kind of addresses this this topic as well. So the next question out to the audience is, how well do you think your company is managing this tension between the need for architecture good practice and then the pressures from the business to continue to deliver products at speed? So this is the, this tension again about, we need to think about things and have a long-term perspective, and in particular, a sort of holistic, enterprise-wide perspective that allows us to join up the different sort of domains or areas of the business. But the business needs stuff done fast. This is this historic tension that's always existed in IT. The business changes more quickly and more frequently than IT can tend to keep up with. So how well do we think your company is managing that tension for the need for architecture good practice versus the need to just respond real world pressures from the business to deliver products at speed? I think we're doing okay on time. Hopefully some time to take a couple more audience questions as well. People, I can see that there's some stuff coming through on the chat. Okay, fantastic, thank you. So, all right. Okay. Interesting balance between well and maybe not so. So it looks like, yeah, still a reasonably split field on that one. Going to pick up on this again and build further on the theme. So we're going to move on to the next question for the panel. Given what we were just talking about a minute ago, I think we'll address this primarily to Stephen in the first instance, and then see what other people have got to add. So Stephen, how do you see the role of an architect in an environment where there are self-sufficient product teams working with their own product owners? Those product owners, of course, have got a conduit to the business. Based on the stuff that we've been discussing, how do you see that, the role of the enterprise architect? Is it placed under any tension or threat or pressure, or is it simply a question of evolving and adapting, like you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the enterprise architecture, it's about being relevant. It's about demonstrating your value and your benefits. What are you bringing to the process? There's no sense, you can't bring your 200 pages of PowerPoint. I think those sort of days have gone, really. That's not really what my EAs do anyway. What I'm looking for is the EA to be often the trusted advisor, but also the bridge between the business and the engineering guys. So obviously the EAs will need to be able to speak the language of the business and the product owners, the product teams, and talk that through into engineering. They often come from an engineering background anyway, and so have credibility there. And then the other side, I think, is the other dimension perhaps is looking across the enterprise, across the product lines, across the teams, so that we don't end up with each team inventing their own version of everything. We do get the benefits of we do get the benefit, the economies of scale. We are an organization of a certain size. A case in point for me at the moment is I've got a team building a consent management system and another team saying, we want to do consent management. And it's my enterprise architecture hat role to say, you need to talk to those guys. We need to be looking at something that we can do together rather than inventing two, rather than having twice the problems, let's go for one. Yeah, you do then create a link and a dependency between the two, and you have to manage that. I appreciate that, but the benefits outweigh the costs in terms of what the enterprise architect can bring, I think. So I see them in those two roles. Look across the business, look across the enterprise, but also look up and down, talk to the business end of things, you know, where the new products are being created and invented, the roadmaps, work on the roadmaps, share that work, and then be that sort of translator through down into the more technical elements of the product teams. It is a difficult role, and you do sit in the middle, and you are asked to talk, you know, I don't know, talk Python and, you know, static code checking on one afternoon, and the next afternoon you're doing, you know, EBITDA and OPEX with the product owners and the budget owners. It is a difficult role, but it's, you know, it's a worthwhile, it's one we all enjoy.
That's what makes it fun. You use an interesting term, trusted advisor, and this is where, you know, the architect is, you know, is also a consultant, but of course the product owner, of course, is also a consultant and a trusted advisor role as well. So I was going to ask Tricia, just based on this question, you know, the role of the architect, based on what Stephen was saying about the trusted advisor, the negotiator, the fact that the product owner is in a similar position, but maybe looking at things in a different time horizon. So how do you see that role of the enterprise architect in this environment where there's massive self-sufficiency? Go ahead.
So for me, the EA role in particular, it is that horizontal, has that horizontal view and aligns what we're doing to the strategy. I think that product owners can be very siloed, so they're only worried about delivering what they need to deliver for their product. Now, and having an architect embedded in that team allows the alignment to the strategy, but I think it's that EA view and across the enterprise is where we can add the value, and I think product owners really only worry about their product.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that relationship is functioning? I'm thinking also, Adeline, Robbie might have a take on this based on your views. So there's the horizontal need to stitch things together end to end coherently versus what's happening within line of sight with each of the product owners. Feels that there's possibility for great interaction and collaboration there. It feels that there's a risk of there being breakpoints as well. Robbie, Adeline, any perspectives on that?
So it is collaboration, but also creates tensions, and I've seen that as well, which needs to be managed and also cleared up early in that process. As Stephen and Trish mentioned, product owners tend to be for that particular capability, business unit, or that for that particular product, and the roadmap on what needs to come in next to enable the business to move forward. Sometimes where I've seen organizations where product owners start to make technical decisions, and that's quite dangerous, because I think that needs to be left then to the EA, because they've got much more holistic view of what's happening in solutions otherwise. So you don't end up with a multiple Salesforce platform in different business units, or multiple HR with different business units actually using the same product. We've seen this before. Some of the application architecture consolidation pieces that we're working on is exactly that. And that's because it's been left to that business unit to make technical decisions. And that's quite dangerous. That creates silos, technical debt. And then you start talking to the CFO. Why what's happening with my costs and increase? I can't budget anymore. You told me this is going to be cheaper. Now is going to the cloud, for example, is much more expensive. Well, because you've not really had a holistic view. So it creates that tension, and it needs to be looked at early in the process. That's what I've seen from experience, really.
Yeah. So I'm just seeing some things coming through in the chat. Sorry, Adeline, go ahead. I'm just picking up on some stuff in the chat here. Please go ahead.
Just a quick one. So we mentioned about EA a lot, where the product owners commonly interact with, aside from the engineering team, is usually the solution architects. So solution architects could be working on the smallest feature to a large system sometimes. Now, where I see how do you make this happen is that part of it also comes down to maturity, because not all product owners are aware of what architecture people does, or the different roles in that nature. So it takes some communication to help people understand. Now, Rabi mentioned about technical debt, for example, and that's one good area that product owners will not have any full understanding normally about what that really means and how that will impact the investment over time. The other part of it that I commonly come across as an example would be, people rushing to develop features and just develop lots of APIs. Now, with lots of APIs, over time, someone has to ask the question about, okay, how are we going to manage all these APIs, hundreds of them? Do we need an enterprise API roadmap, for example? And that's where the investment and total cost of ownership of developing features of several products, if you may, comes into a whole consideration. And that's where the expectation is to be managed carefully and communicate well, often together.
And I think some understanding, you mentioned the total cost of ownership perspective. Clearly, in a decentralized environment, people are very incentivized to build and deliver. They're not always necessarily thinking in the general interest. And again, this is where this sort of intersection between, product delivery and architecture needs to happen. But you're also you're the first person, I think, so far to mention solution architecture, and that's brought back to some of the things that I can see coming through on the feed from the audience. And one particular question that I think has been echoed by several people. So I think we should establish some fundamentals here. So how are we defining enterprise architecture and roles like the platform architect, or for example, the solution architect, but platform architect, program architect, these are other roles with architect in the name. They're all close to the engineering model, and how do they fit with engineering? So how are we defining what is enterprise architect, those other critical but perhaps less well-defined architecture roles? That's open to the panel.
I think one of the big differences with the enterprise architect is the scope responsibility. They are expected to operate across, as the name suggests, across the enterprise, so be able to provide that view. Whereas for me, the solution architects, the focus is on the delivery of the solution, if you like, which is likely to be in one domain or one area rather than have that same scope. And then you get the technical architects, which are more close to subject matter experts and deep into the technology. Platform architects, I think that's an interesting one, where you start to build up, and it's a slightly different model, but we're seeing sort of more of that, I think, and where they're also trying to sort of cut across and take ownership of a platform rather than individual products. So that is a little bit different. I think I'm still trying to figure out on how to treat that category.
Yeah. I also think that it actually depends on what your organization needs. And how architecture operates within your organization. So if I look at IG again as my recent example, we are very domain driven. And so all our technology domains have solution architects in, and then immediately there are developers. So we don't have any other form of architecture apart from solution architects and then principal architects. And the principal, and for me, my role is enterprise-wide, but the principals in the other technology domains are just focused on their technology domains. So that is the architecture need at my organization, and I do feel it depends on the requirements.
Okay, so the consultant and architect's answer, of course, it depends. Sorry, I think that was Rabi.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about it. It's a really good question. I think there's a lot of these terminologies: infrastructure architect, solution architect, domain architects. I think it just confuses things. I just wanted to share, because I mean, Trish mentioned that she's in the EA, but from my side, as a Konvergent, we cover all stacks, right? So we cover the enterprise level, and then the solution level, and then a little bit of the domain. So the EA is exactly what we mentioned earlier across the piece, and doing the linkage of what's happening else in the business. Just as a simple view, solution architecture tend to be a bit more at a program level or a project level, actually owning that end-to-end delivery and the piece of that solution. And then we've seen an emerging of that platform or domain or SME architecture. So like a data specific SME or analytics or an Oracle, or but that would be part of a wider solution, because you don't just put an Oracle estate without actually provisioning security and network and then access to it and all of the end user devices. So it would be part of another, the solution, which the solution architect should be able to knit together. So that's the type of conversation that I'm definitely having with our customers, and we try to simplify it as part of as a service. Just sharing what I've seen really.
I think that this simplification is important because, I mean, to some extent, I think we're saying, kind of Stephen's saying, it's kind of the clues in the name. If you're an enterprise architect, a solution architect, or a platform architect, but I suspect that if you are not in the architecture community, that can possibly be a bit confusing or nebulous to people. I'm conscious that Tricia was saying it kind of depends on your organization, on the needs, and to some extent on the sort of the norms within that organization. But it does seem that whilst there are some, there's some commonality there, there might also be a little bit of still sort of vagueness around the particular size and shape of one architecture versus another. I imagine that must create some further tension and confusion when you get into the sort of product area. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not sure that's
David, the business architecture is always an interesting one as well. I've seen organizations where, well, they're always struggling as to where to fit them in, and I hope to see my enterprise architects work closely with the business architects, but that's not always the case either. It just depends on how they're cast. I think how people see the role of the business architect.
That's a good point, and this is, I shouldn't be expressing opinions, so I'll be careful, but you do see it cut different ways, but also isn't a business architect a type of enterprise architect? Or is there a division, which I've seen in some organizations, where enterprise architect means anything technical and business architect means anything else?
Yeah, we have this debate in Konvergent as well, because we do cover those both domains. But I do believe that there are different skills as well. Business architecture and solution architects are they do tend to think different ways as well.
Very much so. Yeah.
Something in the way something in the wiring, I think, absolutely. Okay. So I won't say which side, which one of those areas I fall down into, but you can probably guess. Right. So if I can pick up with Adeline on this one, how do you find a proper balance between that long lead time architecture? So we need an architecture that fits the business vision and fits the business strategy, and gives us the sort of the shape and parameters of that, versus that that burning need for customer features. So are we pulling away from the architectural vision? So again, it's this sort of intention, emergent tension. So how do we find that balance, Adeline? Have you got a perspective on that?
Right. So I have a common practice in my own past experience with my team, which is essentially, even the most junior person, the most junior technical person in the team, I would often ask them to try and answer the question: what is the vision that we want to achieve here, or what is the outcome that we want to achieve? Because that will encourage people to think a slightly bigger picture over time, and that will hopefully allow people to think about, okay, if I'm in a rush to deliver a feature, if I have 20 features, where am I getting to with the business outcome? And that will lead to a longer view of where essentially architecture wants to establish, which is to return a robust architecture to the organization. So hopefully whatever we deliver is not going to crash the next day. I would say that the other skills that I don't know if we actually achieve the full balance, to be honest, but I would say the other skills that someone in technical professional need to learn is to negotiate with the product owner, because often the pressure to come and deliver features and roll out certain development of the products and all that would come from the product owner, who's clearly had the agreement with the business to deliver. So that is more of soft skills that technical professionals need to consider when they explain the value of needing a bit more time to do a much more thorough quality deliverables. So we're talking about speed versus quality here at times, and that also comes down to the balance, which over time will lead to a longer vision of what the architecture would look like, and essentially will benefit the entire organization medium to long term. It is difficult to balance. A lot of people start off with a team, with a small agile delivery team, and they started delivering a few features. Now, delivering a few features is fine if you're just testing out a small product, but if you need to scale out to different countries and globally, that takes a different perspective and a different view how that long lead comes into picture. So I would say those are the kind of balancing point that I try to embed into the organization when we talk about achieving the balance. And lastly, I think with all the members of my team that I have been leading, they know me quite well. I always encourage them to ask the open questions to the business, even though it might sound silly. For example, if we're going to deliver 50 features in the next 3 months, where are we going with this? What is the end game for the customer experience here?
Okay, we lost you for about 20 seconds or so there, Adeline, but I was just going to sort of recap. I think you were talking about, the need to sort of think long term, the sort of common view on that sort of shared vision. What is it we're building? Are these features in alignment with what we need to build mid to long term? We talked about the need for some negotiating skills and soft skills within that sort of technical community, but of course it's tough for people who are under pressure to to deliver, and there may be compromises sometimes necessary, and negotiated compromises sometimes otherwise when you're really in the heat of pressure to deliver. So if I could pick up with Stephen on that point, because again it's another one of these fundamental tensions, this tension between, as Adeline said, speed versus quality, and delivering in the general interest versus delivering what's needed now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm fully in agreement with Adeline there. I think it's a negotiation. From our experience in negotiation, what we tried to avoid was, product going off developing their roadmaps, technology goes off and develops its, and then do they two fit together or not? And trying to achieve that synchronization has always been difficult. So we're trying to have a more integrated team to create a joint roadmap, which recognizes sometimes technology wants to invest in enabling capabilities, not just in feature delivery, but it's going to be the same teams, so a lot of the same people. So how do we schedule, how do we prioritize? We can't have all features, we can't have all enabling, still got a business to run, but equally we can't let that business accumulate tech debt and complexity because that turns into cost in the end as well. I think that one of the things I've noticed in the last year or two, in particular with the business I'm working with, is we can hear the voice of the client, the voice of the customer is actually helping us, because a client will say, what's your cloud strategy? And product don't have that answer because that sits in IT. They need IT to say, this is what the cloud strategy is, or what's your information security posture? How are you protecting the assets or my data when I give it to you? How are you going to take care of it? And that's not product. Product don't think in that way. They need IT, they need technology to support that and provide those answers. So I think that's helped product recognize the importance and the value of having architecture and technology involved in those conversations. But it's negotiation in the end. There has to be a compromise, and risk associated with not doing those things that you wanted to do has to be recognized too. And that can be revenue risk, and that can be information security risk. It's just got to be recognized and surfaced and a decision taken, rather than it bubbles away underneath and causes problems later on because it never quite goes away.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. These essential tensions, you know, the need for an enterprise roadmap, the need to invest in enablers, but the need to deliver now. That those tensions seem to be ever present. So I think Ravi was going to speak up there.
Yeah, I was just thinking out loud as I was listening to this, is why there is a tension. Shouldn't architecture just be an enabler to the business? The business should be driving, and it should be enabler. So I'm not sure that there should be a tension. The other thing is, you know, it's a fast-moving word. Architecture needs to adapt to that. You know, businesses, they need to transform quickly. If they don't, they have a risk of falling behind against competition and a satisfied audience. With new generation coming into the market, they're demanding new different type of services. So if they don't react to that, businesses don't react to that, then they'll fall behind. And if that happens, then basically even the architects that work for those businesses won't have a job either. So so the key message there is small incremental wins to enable the business to be able to produce new operating models, or much more cost-effective operating models, or new business models to their end users, is where architecture needs to be. It shouldn't be a tension. It should just be, what do you need? Let us try and get you there quickly, but we'll do it incrementally and a bit more in a sound approach that doesn't introduce a lot of risk.
So that's a fantastic point. You know, the business tensions that drive the need for change and adaptation have to be mirrored in the approach to architecture and delivery. So that kind of brings us on to this the last sort of main question, and I think this is kind of the $64,000 question for everyone. So this, I'm going to ask everyone on the panel for their opinions on this, and I'm pretty sure that everyone who's watching has a fairly strong view on this as well. So if I can dial back and just sort of bring it back to some really almost existential questions. How do we think that architecture needs to evolve in order to remain relevant in sort of 5 to 10 years? So are we looking at a future in which architecture has been, you know, essentially negated, or are we looking at a future in which architecture still has a role? So what do we think architecture needs to do to evolve and adapt in order to, you know, to maintain its relevance and its value to the business? Open to the panel there.
I think a little bit is time to get a crystal ball out and predict what the future is going to be, which we're always going to struggle with. So I think in response to that, what you've got to do, I think, and what architecture has to do, is adapt and change and move and match and follow, you know, where the industry is going, where the business is going. You know, I think we don't have all the answers. What we have is that ability to, I think, or what we need to foster is that ability to adapt. I think I've used a phrase before, you know, often for architects, what's got you as that sort of supreme subject matter expert technology guru into the architecture role. Those skills are not necessarily the ones you're going to need in the future. You know, it's a role that changes, and architects need to change with it. So, you know, the days of TOGAF, the heyday of TOGAF was probably 10, 15 years ago, when it was firm process, big documents, and, you know, very rigorous and detailed analysis. And we've recognized that that doesn't work in where we want to go. And DevOps has come through. It's moving at a faster cadence. It's fail fast. It's make small changes. Don't bet the whole farm on one solution that you can have it in 2 years' time. You know, and architects have got to work in that new way, that new world.
So adaptation is the watchword there. Adapt to survive. Something about architects thinking and acting at the pace of the business, but of course architects also have the responsibility of trying to sort of project themselves out into the future to some extent, which is obviously very hypothetical. So what do the rest of the panel think of that architecture and, you know, its need to evolve and adapt to remain relevant?
So,
I'd like to share. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So from my point of view, the business clearly evolves with competition and growth of time as well. So one of the initiatives that I've done in the past is to establish business immersion sessions with architects that will bring in insights from the business directly about all the competition, all the market trends and all that. That allows the architecture team to stay very relevant year on year, because obviously the business evolves as well year on year. The other part of it is also, aside from keeping up to date on the technical skills and the evolution of the technology, is to be able to improve the communication with the business on articulating the architecture value itself. And that means not speaking fully technical all the time and be able to speak in the business language. So I think that's a skill that's worth investing for architects in the future.
A subject dear to Konvergent's heart, I would say that's a key skill, an existential skill for architects in the future. Absolutely. Tricia, Rabi, any thoughts on that?
I was just going to say, maybe we do architecture via stealth. You know, maybe there's a name change. We don't call it architecture, because I think that immediately turns people off, because they, you know, they've got memories and historical experiences of enterprise architecture. Well, actually, really, and some of the great comments I can see in the chat, really, what are we about? What are we there to do? We are there to be that conduit between IT and the business and help the business deliver the outcomes. And I just wonder whether we should, rename ourselves. That might give us a fighting chance.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely will concur that, Trisha. I'm with you on that. I was just trying to share some personal experiences here. So I have had to adapt myself actually to be more relevant and stay in the market. So being an engineer background from a very heavy infrastructure base, I've evolved myself to become much more business and commercial aware and much more innovative as well in my thinking. So that's a skill that architects would benefit from to stay relevant and stay in the market and provide a value to businesses that they work with. And also the other thing is, there's no way you need to be much more than technically aware as well. You need to understand the market and the sector that you're operating in. So whether it's transport, public sector, finance, you need to look at trends of what's happening in that area. So you are always trying to advise businesses to move forward. So one other thing that architects historically are really bad at communicating stuff to the business and architecture information to the business. And that's why key skills is communication, and then how you visualize that information and get the board and stakeholders on board with those architecture principles and the messages you're trying to land. Because they're not going to understand it. So getting the right information at that point in time and visualizing that in a much more business speak is a really key skill that an architect needs to evolve and develop as well.
Absolutely, and that's kind of part of what Adeline was saying about architects need to be able to demonstrate the value of architecture to the business. And a huge part of that, of course, is being able to speak to the business in terms that are relevant and meaningful and where you can cut to the chase. So thank you very much. So we are pretty much at time. So we're probably going to round out there. What we're going to do now is basically we're going to pop up a poll that we put up at the start of the conversation and just see if people's thinking has evolved a little bit on that. So after listening to the debate, do you believe that architecture is still relevant in an engineering world? So we've now got a third choice here. Yes, but it needs to adapt rapidly, or no, it's no longer relevant. So think about that. It's going to be interesting to see how those two polls have evolved over the course of the discussion. So I would like to really sincerely thank our panelists for taking the time today and for sharing their insight and their experience and the wisdom. I think it's been a fantastic discussion, and hopefully the audience have found it to be helpful and insightful. Deeply grateful to Tricia, to Stephen, to Adeline, and to Rabi for committing the time. And thank you much to everyone who has joined in and people who have contributed comments and questions as well. For those who are interested, we'll leave the LinkedIn page for the event up. So if you want to post comments or continue the conversation or the discussion there, then please do. We will be making available both a recording with edited highlights of the discussion itself and some supplemental material in the form of an infographic that's going to distill some of the things that we've discussed, and even some of the information that's come in from the audience, and some other things that we think might be useful and helpful. And of course, if anyone is interested to discuss this further, then Of course, please feel free to contact Alex at Konvergent if there's anything that we can do to aid and assist, or to help to move the subject forward. So, thank you very much once again to the panel. Thank you very much to everyone who has joined in. Please do contribute to the discussion on the LinkedIn page, and look out for more information coming out from us through LinkedIn with the recording of the event and the infographic. Thanks very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks
Thanks,
all.
David.
Thank you all. Bye.